Okay, so hi everyone. First interview for London at Fusion Film Festival, so hopefully watching, and I'm here with Lohr, brilliant film, Beyond Transport, and his niece Elise, who's also part of the film, so welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Ched, if you can just tell me obviously I know the film, know really well, the documentary film, if you could give us, because I'm really fascinated by this, and I'll get on to the reason why, because of course we can all relate to this, but if you could tell us what this is about.
Sure. Beyond Transport is about communication, and it examines our preferences for communication in the personal device era. And I noticed from travels that people were less available for conversation, and that's how we learn from each other.
Because they're all on this, aren't we?
Because of all the personal devices. And I decided to study it and examine this our preferences in this phenomena, and the way that I did it was to explore taxi drivers. And so I interviewed taxi drivers from each of the continents. And the reason why I chose taxi drivers is because I think that they are ideal social scientists because of the randomness and the variety of people that enter their cars.
That's right, yeah.
So they have this perspective on what we do when nobody's looking. And are we open for communication, or do we want to use personal devices and possibly miss out on opportunities to learn from each other? And so that's what I did.
Thank you very much. And Elise, what's your involvement in this film?
Well, I was interviewed last year by him, and he talked about, like, would you rather be in front of a digital cat or a real cat? And I said a real cat, because I mean, like, it's no comparison, because the cat you can play with, you can interact, or like, what if the device dies and then you can't play with the cat
It's not
anymore?
the real thing, is it?
No.
Okay, so were you kind of interested in anything to do with film before this, or was it just, did it come out of the blue and it's like, yeah, I quite fancy being involved in this?
It kind of came out of the blue. I didn't really know that I was going to do it until my mom told me that we would be doing it, and I got really excited and I got really nervous, and then the day that it came, I was really excited to do it.
So what specifically is your connection to this film, in terms of, if you could tell us behind or in front of the camera? So if you could just explain how you became, what your involvement is.
Well, I've seen a lot of people use devices, and so, especially considering that, like, there's a new generation, the new generation always uses their phones, and I guess I'm part of the new generation, and so, I guess my uncle wanted to see what I thought about it.
Because the thing is, when I've got a 5-year-old and I've got a 5-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, let's say my 18-year-old, but almost with her, she's not really used to physical media anymore. She kind of is, because the Blu-rays are still existent, something like that. But my son isn't really. He's solid state, so really he's going to grow up in a world, that purely he knows as connected devices, really.
Right.
And you're kind of that age group as well, because kind of, DVDs and perhaps really we're kind of leaving all that behind. What's the interest for me is, as I was saying earlier, that we've all taken taxi cabs, and I've been in taxis in London or down the coast we live, and of course you're right, they've all got great stories. And I've often thought, God, these guys must have great stories. You don't really get onto that. So what piqued your interest? 'Cause you're right, absolutely right, great for getting the real take on what's going on in the world, but was there a specific moment? Was there like a light bulb moment when this happened? Were you taking a journey somewhere, or how did this sort of coalesce?
Sure. So I was traveling in Australia, and this was after I had just gotten off a dive at the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
And that's where I experienced many travelers that were not available to conversation while on the boat because they were working on their personal devices. And when I got off, I was in a taxi, and I just struck up conversation. And at the end, I offered a tip, and he said, I have one for you instead. And he recommended that I read a book, The Untold History of the United States.
Okay.
And I got home and I read the book, but I started thinking about.
And how good was the book?
It was excellent.
Right, okay.
I would recommend it too.
Oh, okay.
It's definitely worth the read. But I started thinking about those two contrasting experiences, one with a lot of travelers that were unavailable, and then this unexpected conversation that, he had advice to share, and then he also shared his background.
Yeah.
He had worked before working in the taxi industry as an attorney, and so it just it struck me as if I was open, what people would share. Just, everybody's got a story to tell.
Right.
Everybody's got a story if you're open to it. And so I tested it in South Carolina with another taxi driver. Was this one experience or is it more common? And sure enough, this second taxi driver was very open, sharing parts of his life that were very meaningful. And I think that's what I want to emphasize, in the film, is just the magic of communicating and connecting with one another.
Kind of really face to face. Well, I know you've got the back of the head, but it kind of is face, or the side of the head, but yeah.
Right.
The cameras on the dashboard, I think, actually.
Between these personal devices, there's no equal substitute for direct human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's funny because we all do like Skype calls. I'm sure you've done it, or WhatsApp calls, but it's still not the same as the interaction now. Yeah, there is something, absolutely. So I know all of them have different stories and different life experiences.
Yes.
Of course, different continents, different countries. But actually, if we can reverse that, is there something about them, even though they were not connected, that connected them all, if that kind of makes sense? Was there something that made them all part of, not the same family, that you would say there is a theme that's, even though they're completely disconnected, that connected them or not? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And they all were interested in communication. They all enjoyed talking to their passengers, and they were all open to conversation. And the majority of the drivers explained, despite the culture, there's not any one age. Most passengers, when they get in the car, their preference is to tell where they would like to go, and then personal devices are out, and the passengers are engrossed in them until they get to their destination.
And was any part of it, not life for them, life changing, I suppose the phrase I'm trying to look for is, that really surprised you about it?
What surprised me the most is their heartfelt stories.
Right.
After the conversation moved beyond passengers and preferences, I asked many of them what was their most memorable experience with a passenger, or what was the best part of their job, and those stories that they shared highlighted my real purpose in the film, is just the beauty of sharing and communicating when people are open to it. And those stories were very heartfelt, very touching.
And I haven't seen the film. They don't. It's interesting because they don't talk about really so much the money they earn or the big tips. It's actually all these interesting and true stories that they've been through, which is fascinating stuff to see. Mm-hmm. And how did you? Because I know it's different continents, but how did you choose those countries within the continents? Because of course you might want to. This is an example. Okay, so you're in South America, for instance. I can't remember if you went to South America, but
yes.
Perhaps, why would it be Brazil or Argentina or Ecuador? Or, did you? I know you knew the continents, but did you then? How did you come to the subdivision of the countries in those continents?
They were either, like for example, getting to Antarctica. I went through Chile, so I was open to interview taxi drivers in Santiago and Punta Arenas on the way down to the southern tip of Chile to get to Antarctica.
Because you could have easily chosen someone in Buenos Aires, fallen down into Argentina, or
right.
Rio de Janeiro. I mean,
that's right.
Endless, isn't it?
That's right. There, and then I'd never been to Vietnam or Cambodia, so for Asia, I selected those countries, places that I'd never been and had an interest in going.
And when you were, so you get into a taxi, these are brand new people, you've never met them before, you ran, and then immediately you're striking up a conversation saying, this is me, a senior, right? So look, I am actually making this film, and I'm talking to taxi drivers all over the world. Would you mind if I put a camera on the dash and film and just chat for 10, 15 minutes? What generally was the reaction? Well, most of them, I mean, obviously you've got a load to talk about, but in general, as percentage, were most of them open to that or not? How did it kind of work?
Almost all of them were open to the conversation. They had a couple of questions about the documentary, but certainly all of them, I expressed my interest and wanted to use their information, just for the consent for doing this. And almost all of them were open and available. There were very few that said, I can talk, but I don't want my images on the,
right, okay.
Or I'm happy to talk with you, but it can't be recorded for the documentary.
Right, okay, well, okay, that's interesting.
Yes.
And Elise, so when you when you look back at being involved in this experience, does it make you want to become more involved in the filmmaking process, or is it like a one-hit wonder and you're like, that was great, I enjoyed that, but it's not really for me?
Well, I've always liked to be in like movies or being recorded or anything, and so I thought it was really cool, and I was definitely inspired by it, and I thought it was really like fascinating and how like a movie or a documentary is made.
I mean, the thing is, any film, whether it's a narrative or a documentary, what most 99.9% of people don't realise is actually the time involved, preparation. I mean, I know this sort of spoke to those filmmakers, but I guess the question I suppose to you is, now you've got a much better understanding of the time it's involved in. Has it made you look at things different? Because it is a long process. I don't know how long it took you to make, but I know for a fact it's taken a long time. Because all filmmaking, if they're serious filmmakers, are going to make it's going to take a long time. So I'm assuming that gave you a better understanding of just the whole process and the timeline involved. And that still hasn't really put you off. You're still okay with all of that. Because I'm not being funny. A lot of youngsters might go, "Oh, I enjoyed that. Oh my God, the time involved. I can't be dealing with that." But you okay with that?
Well, now that I've been in the documentary, I understand, and now I'm like starting to see more people just literally sitting on their devices and just staring at them like for a long time, and it's made me start to think like,
I want to get behind the camera and make a film.
Yes.
Really? No, seriously? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And I've seen some of the Elise's, I think Elise, her projects that she has edited, with these apps on the phone.
Incredible, isn't it?
So on a family trip last fall, without our knowing, Elise was taking images and photos of us, and she put it together in this edited clip with music, and it was fantastic.
Oh yeah, I can believe it.
It was very creative.
You're looking at me thinking, now what she?
Elise, would you consider an editing from a project? It was really that good, and it was very cool.
And forgive me for saying this, because again, I've spoken to filmmakers. My personal opinion is, any part of filmmaking is really difficult, right? Whatever you're doing, whether you're writing, the producing, the directing, everything. But my personal feeling is, and this is again my opinion, I think editing is I think the hardest part. That is just the way, because I've spoken to lots of editors, so lots of filmmakers, just think to take that jumble of stuff, and particularly if you're an editor that's a gun for hire and you've got to produce a project from a box of footage, I know it's terabytes of drives, whatever, you've got to produce something that's the vision of the filmmaker, right? Obviously, they're going to be there directing you, but actually you're going to be probably at loggerheads. It's human nature, isn't it, right? So I always think that editing is probably the most difficult part.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I did the editing, for this movie, and I found that the most tedious of just, micro movements, trying to capture on the film what I wanted, and the cutting, it's very meticulous, and it took a lot of time.
No, it is. It's a really difficult process. And what's next? Can you say? Can you give us a hint? Clue?
I want to become a better writer.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm, I still want to continue filming, but I have a script in mind that I want to.
Because we spoke about this the other day, and I guessed that was the kind of gig you're trying to get into. So, does that mean you want to move more into narrative features and away from, or perhaps you're going to straddle both lanes, I don't know, but is that something you'd like to get more involved in?
In the writing of scripts, yes.
Right, so more on the narrative side of things.
More in the narrative and writing, maybe fiction.
And what's all that? I mean, I assume is that something that's just been bubbling away and you just kind of get more, because documentary filmmaking is brilliant, but narratives are, but is that really kind of your calling?
I have so many interests right now, it's difficult. I want to, writing is definitely drawing me, and I want to develop that more.
Okay, brilliant stuff. So when you say right, are we talking, I'm trying to dig it, but not too deep. Are we talking, is it a short that, I mean, you've got lots of projects, is there one in particular, is it a short or a feature that's the next big thing if you can do it?
The script will be a feature.
Wow. Okay, and timeline, hopefully, to do this? What's the plan to get this up and running if you can?
It will be completed this year.
Wow. Oh, so you're on it now then? Yes. So I'm
yes.
putting you under the microphone. Listen, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So much, that was fantastic fun.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that.
Absolutely. Thank you.